What's up, you guys? Welcome back to the channel and to another episode of Properly Built Drift Car. In the last episode, we put the 2GZ back in the car. We got everything buttoned up. We got all the fluids in, but we had a no start. The motor cranks builds oil pressure, but we had no spark and no fuel, which indicates some sort of a problem with the crank or cam angle sensor signal getting sent to the ECU. So after trying to troubleshoot it for a couple hours, we basically gave up because I didn't have a computer with me to hook up to the ECU to see the signals and exactly what's happening while the engine's cranking. So we had my buddy Danny from Unrivaled Tuning come down here on a weeknight with me. We hooked up the scanner, and very quickly he noticed that the crank angle sensor was not putting out the proper signal, and the ECU was basically not having it, and it was not creating any spark and fuel. So after a short diagnosis, we realized that the crank angle sensor has a wheel on the crank sprocket like this right here that I have in my hand, and one of these teeth is broken off. Now, I don't know exactly how that happened. It could have happened while I was disassembling the motor or while I was putting the motor back together. I'm not sure. I overlooked it. My bad. The signal was not right and the car will not start. So I have a new piece right here. We're gonna swap it in this morning. I have to take apart the entire timing of the engine, unfortunately, so it's gonna take some time. But we're gonna swap this bad boy in, and hopefully, we'll get to see the motor fire up for the first time today. So stay tuned. Alright, so I got the front timing case cover all taken apart, and now I can actually see that gear and the sprocket that's broken. So I'm going to share that with you guys right here. This is the missing tooth right here. If the camera zooms in, you can see there's a missing tooth. And here's the crank angle sensor. So when this sprocket is rotating, it's catching every single one of these teeth, and that's how it actually determines the position of the engine and the cylinders. And since that tooth was missing, the signal just didn't look right, and the ECU just decided to cut off the actual fuel and ignition system. So this is technically a fairly easy job to do, but because this is a race car and there's a lot of things in the way that generally would not be in the way of a regular car, it becomes a little bit complicated to get there, and it requires quite a bit of special tools, including this harmonic balancer puller. So since we're here, I wanted to talk about my power steering and alternator setup. Because I am running a water pump in the back, I had to delete the water pump up front, which eliminates one of the pulleys, and then it makes things a little bit more complicated on how to run the accessory belt with the tensioner properly. So what I ended up doing is I just put a delete water pump bracket from Red Industries here, so where the alternator sits on that, and that is its own belt system that runs on the ATI dampener. And then Red Industry also makes an adapter kit to run a KRC pump, which is a lot better than factory. It has replaceable internals, which will allow you to change the pressure output for your driving style. And then that comes with an actual pulley kit separate from the ATI dampener that bolts onto the front of the dampener. And now you have an individual belt system for the power steering pump. What that allows me to do is, let's say I have a pump failure or the alternator failure, I can remove that belt and still have the other system working independently, versus the stock system where the belt basically controls everything all at once. If you have a failure of one component or the belt falls off, you're pretty much dead in the water. So this way it makes things a little bit easier in case I do end up having a failure at the track. I can somewhat continue driving if the failure is not serious enough, because it's not gonna get in the way of the other system. So I got everything back together. The timing is back in place. I've already primed the engine with all the spark plugs out. We have good oil pressure, 50 psi to crank. Now it's time to learn if what we did actually fixed the problem, which I'm sure it did, because obviously I've showed you guys that that tooth is missing and it's not supposed to be. So let's just get straight to it and fire this bad boy up for the very first time. Here we go, first start. So we got the motor started, everything's good, oil pressure's good, obviously it's idling very well. There is a tune on this. The only change on the motor done since the rebuild is the compression. So everything's pretty much the same, it's just going to be running a little leaner right now. Obviously we're on driving hard until we dyno it. Right now we're trying to bleed the cooling system. That's like the hardest thing to bleed on these race cars. So we got the back of the car up to make the overflow tank as high as possible. And once we get that bled out, we'll do the power steering a little bit more as well. We have to bleed that, and then maybe we'll take it for a test drive. Man, that thing sounds good. Pressure chilling at 70, 75 psi at idle. Throttle response is great. Yeah, everything looks good. guys, that's gonna wrap it up for this episode. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.